The morning sun painted the desert town of Suncrest in golden light. Mayor Kim Dae-ho sat in his small office, drinking his third cup of coffee and staring at paperwork that seemed to multiply overnight. The biggest problem on his desk was Mrs. Park's complaint about her neighbor's rooster waking everyone up at dawn. In a town of 847 people, this counted as major drama. Dae-ho rubbed his tired eyes and looked out the window. Main Street stretched before him like a dusty ribbon, lined with weathered buildings that had seen better days. The old diner owned by Lee So-young sat next to Park Joon-ho's auto repair shop. Across the street, the general store displayed faded signs advertising everything from fishing gear to birthday cakes. Nothing ever happened in Suncrest. Nothing exciting anyway. The last time anyone talked about something interesting was 3 years ago when that meteor shower lit up the night sky. People still brought it up at the monthly town meetings, describing how pretty the falling stars looked over the desert hills. Dae-ho sometimes wondered if he should have stayed in the big city instead of coming back home to run for mayor. At least there, traffic jams counted as adventure. He was just reaching for another complaint form when the ground started shaking. At first, Dae-ho thought it might be an earthquake. The coffee mug on his desk rattled against a pencil holder. Outside, car alarms began wailing. But earthquakes didn't usually come with that strange humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound grew louder and louder until the windows started vibrating in their frames. Dae-ho rushed outside just as half the town emerged from their buildings. People pointed up at the sky, shading their eyes against the bright morning sun. Something large and dark was falling toward the desert hills just outside town. It wasn't falling like a rock or a plane. It was falling in a controlled spiral, trailing smoke and sparks behind it like a wounded bird trying to find a place to land. The thing hit the ground with a sound like thunder. The impact sent up a massive cloud of dust and sand that could be seen for miles. Car alarms stopped wailing, replaced by an eerie silence that made everyone hold their breath. Park Joon-ho was the first person to move. The mechanic wiped his greasy hands on his work shirt and started walking toward his pickup truck. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "I guess we better go see what that was." Lee So-young came out of her diner, still holding a coffee pot in one hand and a dish towel in the other. Her gray hair was tied back in a neat bun, but her eyes were bright with curiosity. "Could be someone hurt out there," she said. "Better bring the first aid kit." Within minutes, a small convoy of pickup trucks and old cars headed toward the crash site. Dae-ho rode with Joon-ho, while So-young followed in her own truck with Dr. Yoon Hee-jin, the town's only doctor. Nobody talked much during the short drive. They were all thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. That thing in the sky hadn't looked like any airplane they had ever seen. The crash site was easy to find. A long groove had been carved into the desert floor where the object had skidded to a stop. At the end of the groove sat something that definitely wasn't from around here. It was shaped like a teardrop made of dark metal that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its sides, and steam rose from vents near what might have been the front. "Holy cow," Joon-ho whispered. He parked his truck 50 feet away and turned off the engine. "That's not from Boeing." Dr. Yoon stepped out of So-young's truck and adjusted her medical bag over her shoulder. She was a practical woman who had delivered half the babies in town and patched up the other half after various accidents. "Spacecraft or not," she said, firmly, "if there's someone inside that thing, they probably need help." As if her words were a signal, a section of the strange craft's side suddenly hissed open. Steam poured out of the opening, and everyone took a step backward. Through the steam, a figure appeared. The being that stepped out of the spacecraft was like nothing anyone in Suncrest had ever imagined. It stood almost 7 feet tall, with bronze-colored scales that caught the sunlight like polished metal. Its head was elongated, with amber eyes that glowed like lanterns. When it moved, its long tail swept behind it, and everyone could see that its hands ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut steel. The creature wore what looked like armor made from the same dark material as its ship. Symbols glowed softly on the chest piece, and a device that might have been a weapon hung from its belt. When it opened its mouth, everyone could see rows of sharp teeth that belonged in a nightmare. But the strangest thing about the alien visitor wasn't how scary it looked. The strangest thing was that it seemed to be hurt. Green liquid that might have been blood dripped from cuts on its arms and legs. It moved carefully, like someone trying not to make injuries worse. And when those glowing amber eyes looked at the small group of humans, they didn't show anger or threat. They showed confusion and something that might have been relief. The alien tried to say something in a language that sounded like music mixed with growling. When nobody understood, it touched a device on its armor. Suddenly its voice came out in perfect English, though the accent was strange. "I am Veltar of the Corvani Empire," the creature said in a deep, rumbling voice. "My vessel has suffered critical damage. I require assistance to make repairs and contact my people." There was a long moment of silence. 847. People lived in Suncrest, and not one of them had ever taken a class on what to do when aliens crash-landed in their backyard. The moment stretched on until So Young stepped forward, still holding her coffee pot. "Well, honey," she said to the 7-foot-tall alien warrior, "you look hurt. Why don't you come back to town with us and we'll get you fixed up? Dr. Yoon here can take a look at those cuts, and I'll make you something to eat. You must be hungry after all that traveling." Veltar stared down at the small human woman who was talking to him like he was a neighbor who had gotten into a car accident. Tato, all his years of commanding star fleets and conquering worlds, nobody had ever offered him coffee and a bandage. He didn't quite know what to say. Junho was already walking around the crashed spacecraft, examining it with the same expression he used when looking under the hood of a broken-down car. "This is some pretty fancy technology," he called out. "But I bet we can figure out how to patch it up. Metal's metal, right?" And that was how the most feared warrior of the Corvani Empire found himself surrounded by helpful humans who treated his emergency landing like just another Tuesday problem that needed solving. Sheriff Choi Min-soo was having lunch at the diner when his radio started crackling with excited voices. Something about a crash and strangers and maybe calling the military. He had been sheriff of Suncrest for 12 years, and usually the biggest. Emergency was teenagers toilet papering the water tower, but the voices on the radio sounded different today. They sounded amazed instead of worried. Min-soo paid for his sandwich and drove toward the desert hills, expecting to find a small plane crash or maybe some city folks who had gotten their RV stuck in the sand. He definitely did not expect to find Mayor Kim standing next to what looked like a spaceship from a science fiction movie. And he absolutely did not expect to see a 7-foot-tall lizard creature sitting on a folding chair while Dr. Yoon bandaged its arm. "Min-soo," Mayor Kim called out as the sheriff parked his patrol car. "Come meet our visitor. This is Veltar. He's from outer space." Veltar looked up from where Dr. Yoon was cleaning the cuts on his scaled arms. The alien's glowing amber eyes studied the sheriff carefully. In his home galaxy, law enforcement officers were usually the first to show aggression toward strangers. But this human approached with the same calm curiosity as the others. "Sheriff," Veltar said with a formal nod. His translator device made his deep voice sound almost normal, though there was still something musical about the way he spoke. "I am Veltar, former chieftain of the 7th Fleet of the Corvani Empire. I claim no territory on your world and seek only temporary sanctuary while I repair my vessel." Min-soo looked at the alien, then at the crashed spaceship, then back at the alien. He had trained for hostage situations and natural disasters. Nobody had ever mentioned what to do if aliens landed in his jurisdiction. "Okay," he said finally. "Do you have any identification?" Veltar reached for a device on his belt, moving slowly so he would not alarm the sheriff. The device projected a hologram showing official documents covered in alien writing. "These are my credentials from the Corvani High Command, he explained. Minsu studied the floating hologram like it was a driver's license. Well, I can't read any of this, but it looks official enough. Are you planning to cause any trouble while you're here? I seek only to repair my ship and continue my journey, Veltar replied. Fair enough, Minsu said. He pulled out a small notebook and started writing. I'll need to file a report about this. What's your last name? Veltar paused. In his culture, names were given based on military rank and conquest achievements. I do not understand this concept of family names. Just put down Veltar Space Guy, So Young called from where she was unpacking a picnic basket next to the alien's chair. That's what everyone's going to call you anyway. While the sheriff filled out his paperwork, Dr. Yoon continued treating. Veltar's injuries. The alien's blood was green instead of red, but cuts were cuts, and the doctor worked with the same gentle efficiency she used on everyone else. These will heal fine, she told Veltar as she applied the last bandage. But you need to take it easy for a few days. No heavy lifting or running around until those scales grow back properly. Veltar stared at the human female who had just given him medical orders like he was one of her regular patients. You show no fear of me, he observed. My species is known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors. Dr. Yoon packed up her medical bag and shrugged. Honey, I've been treating injured folks for 30 years. Doesn't matter if you're human or alien. When you're hurt, you need help. That's just how it works. An old pickup truck rattled up to the crash site, and an elderly woman climbed out. Mrs. Nam Yunha was 73 years old and had lived in Suncrest her entire life. She had gray hair tied up in a colorful scarf and wore a dress covered in flower patterns. In her hands, she carried a covered dish that smelled amazing. I brought kimchi, she announced to everyone. Figured our space visitor might be hungry. So Young looked worried. Yunha, we don't know if aliens can eat human food. What if it makes him sick? Only one way to find out, Mrs. Nam replied. She walked right up to Veltar and held out the dish. You hungry, dear? Veltar looked down at the tiny, elderly human offering him food. In his world, conquered people brought tribute out of fear, but this woman seemed to be giving him a gift simply because she thought he might be hungry. I do not wish to impose, he said carefully. No imposing about it, Mrs. Nam said firmly. You're a guest in our town. Guests get fed. That's the rule. The alien chieftain accepted the dish and cautiously tasted the spicy fermented vegetables. His amber eyes widened in surprise. This is excellent, he said. The flavors are complex and pleasing. Mrs. Nam beamed with pride. Secrets in the fish. Sauce, she said. I'll teach you the recipe if you want. More vehicles began arriving at the crash site. Word had spread through town that they had an actual alien visitor, and people were curious. But instead of bringing weapons or calling for military help, they brought folding chairs and coolers full of drinks. Soon, the crash site looked less like an emergency scene and more like a desert picnic. Veltar watched in amazement as humans of all ages gathered around him. Children peeked out from behind their parents, staring at him with wonder instead of fear. Teenagers took pictures with their phones, asking if they could post them online. Adults asked polite questions about his journey and whether he needed anything to make him more comfortable. This is highly irregular, Veltar said to Mayor Kim. When my people encounter new species, there are protocols, territorial negotiations, displays of strength, formal declarations of intent. Mayor Kim was setting up a card table next to Veltar's chair. Well, this is Suncrest, he said. We do things a little different here. You crash-landed near our town, so that makes you our responsibility. We take care of our own. But I am not one of your own, Veltar pointed out. I am an alien from a distant star system. Details, So Young said, handing him a glass of iced tea. You're here now, aren't you? That makes you a neighbor. Veltar accepted the cold drink and looked around at the growing crowd of humans. They were treating him like a welcome guest instead of a potential threat. Children were drawing pictures of his spaceship. Teenagers were asking about faster-than-light travel. Adults were discussing the best way to help him repair his vessel. 4. The first time in his long career as a warrior and conqueror, Veltar encountered something completely outside his experience. These humans had turned his emergency landing into a social gathering. They had transformed his moment of vulnerability into an opportunity for community connection. He was beginning to suspect that humans might be the strangest species in the galaxy. By evening, news about the alien visitor had spread beyond Suncrest. Phone calls went out to neighboring towns, social media posts were shared hundreds of times, and the local radio station interrupted its regular programming to talk about nothing else. But instead of panic or calls to government agencies, the response was something Veltar had never encountered in all his years of intergalactic warfare. Everyone wanted to meet him. Mayor Kim sat in his office that night fielding phone calls from excited residents. His desk was covered with handwritten notes from people volunteering to help. Mrs. Lee offered to let the alien stay in her guest bedroom. Mr. Park wanted to know if spaceships needed regular oil changes. The high school principal asked if Veltar would be willing to speak to the students about space exploration. "This is unprecedented," Kim muttered to himself as he hung up from the 15th call of the evening. He had been mayor for 6 years, and the biggest event he had ever organized was the annual Founders' Day parade. Now he had constituents asking him to plan humanity's first official alien welcome party. The next morning, Kim called an emergency town meeting at the community center. Word spread quickly, and by 10 o'clock, nearly every resident of Suncrest had crowded into the small building. Veltar sat in the front row, still wearing bandages from his crash landing. He looked around nervously at all the human faces staring back at him. "Folks," Mayor Kim began, "we find ourselves in a unique situation. We've got an honest-to-goodness visitor from outer space, and I think we need to discuss how we're going to handle this properly." An elderly man named Go Sung Min raised his hand. He owned a small ranch outside town and was known for his practical approach to problems. "Seems to me the fellow needs a place to stay while he fixes his ship. I've got an empty cabin he can use." "That's very kind," Veltar said, standing up to address the crowd. "But I must clarify my situation. I am not merely a traveler. I was the chieftain of a powerful military fleet. My people have conquered dozens of star systems. You should not treat me as a harmless guest." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Mrs. Nam Yun-ha, who was sitting in the third row, spoke up. "Honey, I don't care if you were the king of Mars. You're hurt, you're far from home, and you need help. That's all that matters to us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Veltar sat down slowly, more confused than ever. These humans seemed completely unconcerned with his former status or military achievements. They cared only about his immediate needs as a person in trouble. "Now then," Mayor Kim continued, "I think this situation calls for something special. We don't get visitors from other galaxies every day. I propose we throw a proper welcome party for our new friend. A town-wide barbecue to show him what Suncrest hospitality is all about." The suggestion was met with enthusiastic approval. Hands shot up around the room as volunteers offered their services. So Young would coordinate the food preparation. The volunteer fire department would handle tables and chairs. The high school band would provide entertainment. Even the local pastor offered to give a blessing that would be respectful to alien beliefs. Veltar watched in amazement as the entire human community mobilized around the simple idea of welcoming him properly. "This is unnecessary," he protested. "I require only basic shelter and access to repair materials." "Oh, hush," said Young Si-woo, who owned the town's only restaurant besides So Young's diner. "You can't have your first experience with human culture be sleeping in a garage and eating cold sandwiches. We've got standards to maintain." Han Woo-jin, a 17-year-old who was already studying engineering in preparation for college, raised his hand. "Mr. Veltar, I've been looking at pictures of your spaceship online. The propulsion system looks like it uses some kind of energy field manipulation. I bet if we combine your technology with some of our manufacturing techniques, we could get you back in space in no time." "You would help me repair my vessel?" Veltar asked, surprised. "Even though I am a stranger from another world?" "Well, yeah," Wujin replied, as if the answer was obvious. "That's what neighbors do. They help each other fix things." Dr. Yoon stood up from her seat near the back of the room. "We'll need to make sure the welcome party doesn't interfere with his recovery. Those injuries need a few more days to heal properly." "Don't worry, Doc," said Captain Lim Jae-sung from the volunteer fire department. "We'll make sure he has a comfortable place to sit and doesn't overdo it. Maybe we can even make him an honorary firefighter while he's here." Veltar's amber eyes widened. "Honorary firefighter?" "Sure," Captain Lim said with a grin. "You're tall enough to reach the high stuff, and I bet you're strong enough to carry our equipment. Plus, your scales would probably protect you from heat better than our gear." The meeting continued for another hour as the humans planned every detail of their welcome celebration. They debated whether to hang lights or lanterns, whether to serve traditional Korean food or stick to American barbecue, and whether the high school marching band should learn any space-themed songs for the occasion. Through it all, Veltar sat in growing bewilderment. In his experience, when different species encountered each other, the result was either warfare or careful diplomatic negotiations. Treaties were signed, territories were divided, and hierarchies were established. But these humans seemed to operate on an entirely different system. They weren't trying to conquer him or submit to his authority. They weren't afraid of his superior technology or impressed by his military background. Instead, they had looked at his situation and decided that the appropriate response was to throw him a party. "I don't understand," he finally said during a brief lull in the planning. "Why are you doing this for me? I am not one of your species. I have nothing to offer you in return." The room fell quiet as everyone looked at him with genuine confusion. Finally, old Mrs. Nam spoke up from her seat. "Sweetie," she said in the patient tone she usually reserved for explaining things to small children, "you're here, aren't you? You're in our town, you need help, and you seem like a nice enough fellow. That's reason enough." "But what do you gain from helping me?" Veltar pressed. "A new friend," So Young said simply. "Maybe some interesting stories about other planets, and the satisfaction of knowing we did the right thing." Veltar stared at her, then looked around the room at all the human faces. For the first time in his long career as a warrior and leader, he was encountering a species that seemed to help others not for strategic advantage or personal gain, but simply because helping was the right thing to do. It was the most alien concept he had ever encountered. The next 3 days turned Suncrest into a hive of activity unlike anything the town had ever seen. Veltar found himself swept along in a current of human enthusiasm that seemed to have its own unstoppable momentum. He had expected to spend his time quietly repairing his ship and planning his next move. Instead, he discovered that being the guest of honor at a human welcome party was apparently a full-time job. On Wednesday morning, Seo Mi-jin arrived at Go Sung-min's ranch where Veltar was staying. She was the town's elementary school teacher, a cheerful woman in her 30s who wore bright colors and always seemed to be carrying art supplies. Today, she had brought something even more challenging than finger paints. She had brought children. "Mr. Veltar," she said as her class of 22 third graders filed out of the yellow school bus. "I hope you don't mind, but my students have been dying to meet you. We're studying about different cultures this month, and you're the most different culture we've ever had the chance to learn from." Veltar looked down at the small humans who were staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. In his homeworld, children were kept away from warriors and military leaders until they were old enough for combat training. But these human offspring showed no fear at all. Instead, they seemed fascinated by his appearance. A small girl with pigtails raised her hand. "Mr. Alien, do you have a family?" "I had a mate and offspring," Veltar replied carefully. "But they were lost when I was exiled from my people." The children's faces immediately filled with sympathy. A boy wearing a baseball cap stepped forward. "That's really sad. Do you miss them?" "Every day," Veltar admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Well, now you have us," the girl with pigtails declared. "We can be your Earth family until you find your space family again." Veltar felt something strange happen in his chest, a warm feeling that he hadn't experienced since his exile began. These small humans were offering him something his own warrior culture had never provided: unconditional acceptance and emotional support. The children spent an hour asking questions that revealed more about human nature than any diplomatic briefing could have. They wanted to know if he liked ice cream, whether aliens had pets, and if he could teach them to say hello in his language. Not one of them asked about his weapons or his military conquests. They were interested in him as a person, not as a warrior. When the school visit ended, Veltar found himself looking forward to seeing the children again at the welcome party. It was a feeling he couldn't quite understand. In his world, emotional attachments were considered weaknesses that could be exploited by enemies, but these humans seemed to view emotional connections as sources of strength. That afternoon, mechanic Jun Ho and engineering student Wu Jin arrived to work on the damaged spacecraft. Veltar had expected them to struggle with his advanced technology, but he was amazed by their innovative approach to problem-solving. "See, the way I figure it," Jun Ho said, crawling out from under the ship's hull. "Your energy conduits work on the same basic principles as electrical wiring. Different materials, sure, but electricity is electricity." Wu Jin nodded enthusiastically. "And if we can't find exact replacement parts, we can manufacture adapters that will let your systems work with Earth components temporarily. It won't be as efficient as original equipment, but it should get you back in space." Veltar watched them work with growing respect. These humans didn't have his people's advanced manufacturing capabilities or exotic materials, but they made up for it with creativity and determination. More importantly, they shared their knowledge freely with each other, building on each other's ideas instead of competing for dominance. "In my culture," Veltar told them as they worked, "technological knowledge is closely guarded. Engineers compete against each other for advancement and recognition." "That sounds like a waste of time," Wu Jin said, not looking up from the energy coupling he was examining. "If everyone keeps their discoveries secret, how does anyone make progress?" "We advance through conquest," Veltar explained. "We take technology from the species we defeat and add it to our own knowledge." Junho stopped what he was doing and looked at the alien with concern. "But what happens to the people you conquer? Do they get to keep living their lives?" Veltar hesitated. The honest answer was that conquered species became slaves or were eliminated if they proved too troublesome. But looking at these humans who were freely helping him repair his ship, he found himself reluctant to admit the brutal nature of his people's expansion. "They become part of our empire," he said finally. "Huh," Junho said, returning to his work. "Sounds lonely. I mean, if you're always taking stuff from other people instead of working together, you never really get to know them, do you?" The simple observation hit Veltar like a physical blow. In all his years of military service, he had never considered the possibility that cooperation might be more effective than conquest. His people measured strength by how many worlds they controlled, but these humans seemed to measure strength by how many connections they could build. That evening, as preparations for the welcome party continued around town, Veltar sat on the porch of Go Sung-min's guest cabin and tried to process everything he had learned. The old rancher joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee and settling into a wooden rocking chair. "You look like a man with something heavy on his mind. Sungmin observed. I am beginning to understand something about your species, Veltar said slowly. You derive power not from domination, but from cooperation. You grow stronger by making others stronger as well. Never thought about it quite that way, Sungmin admitted. But I suppose that's true. Hard to get anything done all by yourself. Better to have friends helping than enemies fighting. But how do you maintain order? How do you prevent chaos without strict hierarchies and military control? The old rancher was quiet for a moment, rocking gently in his chair. Well, I reckon when people feel like they belong somewhere, when they know their neighbors care about them, they don't usually want to cause trouble. Give folks a reason to take care of each other, and they generally will. Veltar thought about the children who had offered to be his Earth family. He thought about Dr. Yoon treating his injuries, without hesitation, and Mrs. Nam bringing him food simply because she thought he might be hungry. He thought about Junho and Woo Jin working on his ship not for payment or recognition, but because helping was what neighbors did. For the first time since his exile began, Veltar started to wonder if there might be alternatives to the warrior, culture that had defined his entire life. Maybe strength didn't have to come from the ability to destroy enemies. Maybe it could come from the ability to create friends. As the desert stars appeared overhead, Veltar realized that these humans had already begun to change him in ways he was only beginning to understand. And tomorrow's welcome party was going to change him even more. Desert Town. Gets a surprise. Alien Chieftain moves in, turns heads at welcome. BBQ. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of mesquite and barbecue smoke across the desert. By 8 o'clock, the empty lot next to the community center had been transformed into something that looked like a combination county fair and space-age celebration. Colorful banners hung between lampposts, picnic tables were arranged in friendly clusters, and a hand-painted sign near the entrance read, "Welcome to Earth, Veltar." Veltar stood at the edge of the gathering, wearing a clean set of clothes that Go Sung-min had bought for him in the neighboring town. The jeans and button-down shirt felt strange after a lifetime of wearing military armor, but the humans had insisted that the guest of honor should look his best. Someone had even made him a name tag, though instead of his military titles, it simply said, "Hello, my name is Veltar, our friend from space." "You ready for this?" Mayor Kim asked, walking up with a paper plate already loaded with more food than Veltar had ever seen in one place. "I am uncertain what to expect," Veltar admitted. "In my culture, formal gatherings involve ceremonies of dominance and displays of military strength." "Well, you're in luck," Kim replied with a grin. "The only thing we'll be displaying here is Mrs. Park's famous potato salad and maybe some questionable dance moves after the sun goes down." As if summoned by the mention of food, people began arriving in steady streams. Families carried covered dishes and coolers full of drinks. Teenagers hauled speakers and guitars. Even visitors from neighboring towns showed up, drawn by word-of-mouth reports about the alien guest who had landed in Suncrest. But instead of the curious crowds that Veltar had expected, he found himself surrounded by individuals who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him personally. Mrs. Nam arrived with a fresh batch of kimchi and immediately began explaining the fermentation process in detail. Captain Lim presented him with an official Suncrest Fire Department hat and a certificate naming him an honorary firefighter. Dr. Yoon checked on his healing injuries and declared him ready for light socializing. The most surprising moment came when Reverend An Kyung-ho approached the small stage that had been set up near the food tables. Veltar tensed, expecting some kind of religious conversion attempt or territorial blessing that would exclude him as an outsider. Instead, the pastor spoke briefly about gratitude for safe travels, the importance of welcoming strangers, and the hope that all beings could find peace and friendship wherever their journeys might take them. He never mentioned specific human religious beliefs, never suggested that Veltar should adopt their customs, and never treated the alien as anything other than an honored guest deserving of respect. "Thank you," Veltar said quietly after the blessing ended. In my experience, religious leaders usually demand conversion or submission from outsiders. "Different approach here," Reverend An replied simply. "We figure the universe is big enough for all kinds of beliefs, and it's not our job to tell other folks how to talk to whatever they consider holy." As the day progressed, Veltar found himself passed from group to group like a beloved relative visiting for the holidays. The high school students taught him card games and showed him pictures on their phones. The older residents shared stories about Suncrest's history and asked polite questions about life on other worlds. Children drew pictures of him and his spaceship, creating artwork that they insisted he keep as souvenirs. Jung Si-woo spent 20 minutes discussing the proper way to season beef for grilling, treating Veltar like a fellow food enthusiast rather than an exotic specimen. Baker Kim Hae-won brought samples of what she called galaxy cookies, sugar cookies decorated with edible glitter to look like stars and planets. "These represent my attempt to create Earth desserts suitable for interplanetary visitors," she explained seriously. "I wasn't sure what aliens might like, so I made them extra sweet and sparkly." Veltar tried one of the cookies and found himself smiling despite his confusion. "They are delicious," he assured her, "though I must point out that I am not significantly different from humans in terms of dietary needs." "Well, better safe than sorry," Hae-won replied. "Besides, everyone likes cookies that look like stars." As the afternoon wore on, something unexpected happened. Veltar stopped thinking about the gathering as a strange human ritual and started enjoying it as simply a pleasant way to spend time with friends, because that's what these people had become, he realized with surprise. Friends, not allies in some strategic partnership, not subjects acknowledging his authority, not enemies forced into submission, just friends who seemed to genuinely enjoy his company and want him to feel welcome in their community. When the sun began to set, the party shifted into evening mode. String lights came on overhead, creating a warm glow that made everyone's faces look soft and friendly. The high school band played music that ranged from classical marches to popular songs that had the younger crowd dancing on the grass. Kwon Tae-min, a teenager with musical ambitions, approached Veltar with his guitar. "Want to hear something cool? I wrote a song about your spaceship landing. It's called Visitor from the Stars." The song was simple but heartfelt, telling the story of a traveler from far away who found friendship in an unexpected place. As Taemin played, other people gathered around to listen, and by the end, half the crowd was humming along to the chorus. "That was beautiful," Veltar told the young musician. "In my culture, songs are usually about military victories or conquest achievements. Those sound pretty boring," Taemin replied. "I like songs about real stuff that matters to people. Friendship, love, finding your place in the world. You know, things that actually make life worth living." As the evening continued, Veltar found himself thinking about the young human's words. What made life worth living? For years, his answer would have been victory in battle, advancement in rank, and the respect that came from being feared by enemies. But sitting here among these humans who had welcomed him with open hearts, he began to wonder if there might be better answers. The highlight of the evening came when Captain Lim presented Veltar with his firefighter helmet and asked him to help demonstrate proper ladder safety techniques. The alien's height and strength made him perfect for reaching high places, and soon he was working alongside the volunteer firefighters like he had been part of their team for years. "You're pretty good at this," Captain Lim observed, as Veltar helped secure a practice rescue line. "Ever think about making a career change?" "I was trained as a warrior and military commander," Veltar replied. "I know nothing about protecting people." "Same skills, different application," the fire captain pointed out. "Instead of conquering enemies, you'd be conquering emergencies. Instead of leading attacks, you'd be leading rescues. Might be more rewarding in the long run. As the party wound down near midnight, Veltar stood at the edge of the gathering and looked around at the scene. Families were packing up leftover food, teenagers were taking down decorations, and small groups of friends lingered in conversation under the string lights. It looked like the aftermath of any successful community celebration, except for one crucial difference. For the first time in his life, Veltar was part of a community that had welcomed him not because of his power or military achievements, but simply because he was a person who needed friendship and belonging. These humans had shown him that strength could come from connection rather than domination, and that the greatest victories were the ones that created allies instead of enemies. Standing there in the desert night, surrounded by the gentle sounds of humans caring for each other and cleaning up together, Veltar realized that he never wanted to leave. Desert Town. Gets a surprise, alien chieftain moves in, turns heads at welcome. BBQ 2 weeks after the welcome party, Veltar's spaceship was fully repaired and ready for launch. Junho and Woojin had worked miracles with Earth technology, creating hybrid systems that were actually more efficient than his original equipment. The ship's communication array was functioning perfectly, and long-range sensors showed clear paths to several inhabited star systems where he could start over. But instead of preparing for departure, Veltar found himself sitting in Mayor Kim's office, staring at paperwork that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," Kim said, reviewing the handwritten documents spread across his desk. "You want to apply for permanent residence in Suncrest, and you're requesting a job as Assistant Fire Chief and Community Emergency Coordinator." "That is correct," Veltar replied. "Captain Lim has indicated that my physical capabilities and tactical training would be valuable assets for the fire department, and Dr. Yoon believes my medical knowledge of multiple species could be useful if we encounter other alien visitors." Kim leaned back in his chair and studied the 7-foot-tall alien who had become the town's most enthusiastic volunteer in just 2 weeks. Since the welcome party, Veltar had helped repair the community center's roof, assisted with 3 emergency calls, and somehow became the unofficial coordinator for Suncrest's first annual Friendship Day celebration. "What about your people?" Kim asked gently. "Don't you want to try to contact your homeworld and work things out with them?" Veltar was quiet for a long moment. That morning, he had finally activated his ship's long-range communication system and sent a message to his former second-in-command in the Corvani fleet. The response had been swift and clear. He was permanently exiled, his military rank was stripped, and any attempt to return home would result in immediate execution. But strangely, the news hadn't brought the despair he had expected. Instead, he felt something that might have been relief. "I did contact them," he said finally. "They made it clear that I am no longer welcome among my own people. But I find that I am no longer certain I would want to return even if I could." "Oh?" Kim prompted. "Mayor Kim, in my 43 years of life, I commanded starfleets, conquered 17 worlds, and was feared across 3 star systems. I had wealth, power, and the respect that comes from military dominance. But I was never happy." Veltar stood up and walked to the office window, looking out at Main Street where So Young was setting up outdoor tables for the lunch crowd and Junho was teaching a group of children how to check tire pressure. "In the past month," he continued, "I have learned to play human card games, assisted with medical emergencies, and helped organize a community celebration. I have been given friendship freely, without having to conquer or intimidate anyone. For the first time in my life, I wake up each day looking forward to what I might accomplish with others, rather than what I might take from them." Kim nodded, thoughtfully. "And you think you'd be happy staying here permanently?" "I think I would be useful here," Veltar replied. "My knowledge of galactic civilizations could help Earth prepare for future contact with other species. My tactical training could be valuable for emergency response, and my experience with different cultures might help if other alien refugees find their way to your world. The mayor stood up and extended his hand for a handshake. Well then, welcome to the team, Veltar. Though I have to warn you, the paperwork for alien immigration is probably going to be a nightmare. I am prepared for bureaucratic challenges, Veltar said, accepting the handshake with a grip that was gentle despite his obvious strength. That evening, Veltar sat at his usual table in So Young's diner, surrounded by what had become his regular dinner companions. Dr. Yoon was explaining the finer points of human psychology to him, while Mrs. Nam taught him to play poker with buttons instead of money. Captain Lim was reviewing emergency response protocols, and Wu Jin was showing him pictures of improvements they could make to the fire truck using adapted alien technology. So it's official? So Young asked as she refilled his coffee cup. You're staying permanently? If you will have me, Veltar replied. Honey, Mrs. Nam said while reorganizing her poker hand, you were one of us the minute you crashed in our backyard. The paperwork is just catching up to reality. As the evening progressed, Veltar found himself thinking about a message he wanted to send to his former second-in-command. Not a plea for forgiveness or a request to return, but something else entirely. Later that night, he activated his ship's communication array one final time and composed a message to Lieutenant Kreshatar, who now commanded his former fleet. Old friend, you asked me to explain why I chose exile over glory. I have found my answer on a small world in an unremarkable star system. The humans here have taught me something that our military training never covered. True strength does not come from the ability to conquer others, but from the ability to help them flourish. These beings do not expand their territory through warfare. Instead, they expand their community through welcome. They do not measure success by how many worlds they control, but by how many individuals they can help to thrive. They have turned their entire planet into a place where anyone can belong, regardless of their origin or past mistakes. I have seen their children offer friendship to strangers without hesitation. I have watched their healers provide care without payment. I have witnessed their builders work together on projects that benefit everyone rather than competing for individual advancement. This is not weakness, as we were taught. This is the ultimate form of strength. Tell the High Command that they misunderstand humans entirely. Any species that tries to conquer such people will find themselves not defeating enemies, but missing the point of existence itself. The humans have discovered something that all our military might never achieved. They have created a way of living that makes everyone around them want to be better. I will not be returning to Corvani space. I have found something here worth more than any empire. I have found a home where I am valued not for what I can take, but for what I can give. May you one day discover what I have learned here, that the greatest victory is not defeating your enemies, but turning them into friends. Veltar sent the message and then powered down his ship's systems for the last time. Tomorrow, he would begin his new job as Suncrest's first alien firefighter and emergency coordinator. Next week, he would start teaching interspecies relations at the high school. Next month, he would help organize the town's first galactic friendship festival for any other alien refugees who might find their way to Earth. But tonight, he was simply a member of a community that had welcomed him home. As he walked back toward Go Sung Min's ranch under a canopy of desert stars, Veltar reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He had been exiled from his own people as a failure and a traitor. But the humans of Suncrest had taught him that sometimes the greatest failures can become the foundation for the most meaningful successes. He had lost an empire, but gained a family. He had given up the power to conquer worlds, but discovered the joy of building communities. He had traded military command for the opportunity to serve others, and found that service was far more rewarding than domination had ever been. In the distance, he could see the lights of the town where people who had become his friends were settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help, and new ways to contribute to the community that had given him a second chance at life. For the first time since his exile began, Veltar was exactly where he belonged. The desert, town of Suncrest had gotten a surprise when an alien chieftain crash-landed in their backyard. But the biggest surprise of all was discovering that sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe is simply making room at your table for one more friend.